People are going to spend their own money much better than the government can spend it. A huge sum of money for what? For the privilege of walking out your own door. They have incentivized what we want to see, which is activity, competition, dynamism, entrepreneurialism, innovation. Japan was subject to a sort of punitive action from China, acted on in an economic way that withheld resources from Japan that they needed. Skills, we had a lot of people who, chemical engineers, choosing STEM careers, unsuitable to leadership, get close to the top. And that's by having no humility, having a total confidence in their own viewpoint, not wanting to listen, wanting to punish people who question their authority.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Thomas. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Very good. Really good to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation here. Could you, before we go and delve into specific areas, could you share a bit of your background, your experience, and then life in general?
Sure. I think, my dad grew up in an orphanage in post-war Germany, which I think was quite effective. That flowed through my life. So I've been quite interested in Germany as a result, and particularly in East and West Germany. He came to Australia with very little English and with no university degree, but he found the conditions here were such that he was able to start a business which succeeded, and which, even with no backing, no family there and so on, put me and my sister through university, which is, opportunity he didn't get. So I guess it created a sense of responsibility, or a push to be worthy of the opportunity that he had, given through that sacrifice. I'm very happy that he came to Australia and found the right conditions for that to happen. I guess, I think of being in Germany with him later in life, that we would drive around and see what he called a miraculous change in Eastern Germany after, democracy and the free market was allowed to come back. And so I've often been quite, interested in that. It's why I've become a student of history, I think, particularly in the Cold War. So that's maybe the family background. Professionally, at uni, I studied law. I'd studied history, politics, and economics at school, and I'd been a captain of debating and a captain of public speaking, and I think that was probably my first positive shock that sort of pushed me towards leadership and towards advocacy and so on, because I was surprised to be nominated by peers in that to that captaincy. And I also think there was a deputy principal who I felt I didn't really know at high school, who just spontaneously said to me one day, while I was still thinking about what I'd do with my life, "Oh, but you'll go and study law." And I thought, well, blimey, I wouldn't have, am I up to that, But he had such sense of confidence in me, and I don't know what I'd done to earn it. But I guess it brought home how little encouragement people sometimes get, and all it takes is a little push like that.
Yeah.
So that sent me to law school in large part. And then I left law school. I was not a particularly natural law student, I don't think. There was a sort of a climate it was at UWA, which is an excellent school. The climate, nevertheless, within the law community or the studies was a little transactional. It was kind of quite hierarchical in the sense of, who's got a clerkship, who's got an associateship with a judge, whose dad is a barrister, this sort of thing. So I didn't come from that background. Not to say we weren't, not to say we were living in a log cabin, but we didn't have that sort of long familial kind of thread of the law running through the family. So I didn't want to necessarily. I didn't have a strong sense that I was going to, despite getting about halfway through the law degree, didn't think necessarily I was going to go on and practice. I was at risk of not necessarily even finishing the degree at one point. But I met this psychology professor on a mountain in Vietnam when I was doing my sort of, through Southeast Asia. I was doing this motorbike tour with my mate. We just ran into this guy on the top of a mountain. It was a bizarre scene of like a rope bridge, and it was all misty, and this guy sort of comes out of the mist, this Australian psychology professor. And he told me, essentially talked me into finishing my degree, and then just vanished. And we never saw him again. And my friends laughed because, my dad got so mad because I came back to Australia, of course, and said, I'm going to finish. And he was so frustrated because he said, this bloke said nothing different than I've been saying this whole time. And you listen to him, this bloke that you met, covered in bells and dreadlocks and stuff. So it's a long way of saying I finished the law degree.
That's good.
I was at risk of not doing it, and then got into politics and advocacy ultimately. Yeah.
Wow, that's two big words you use in the end. Politics and advocacy.
Yeah.
Could you? I think the politics inevitably, for good or bad reason, you see both sides. The good, not three sides, good, bad, and the ugly of the triangle. Sure. Yeah. And you'll have the fair share of your experiences, and you've met multiple people growing this. But could you take us through the tapestry of your experience through the political side of it, and then we can delve into specific topics?
Sure. Well, thanks for the interest. I started off at the end of law school. I went into an internship at the Australian, the newspaper, the bureau in Perth. I was already interested at that time. My colleagues were getting, as I said, clerkships and apprenticeships and various other things. And I decided I wanted to write about state politics, write about the economy, and write about business and certain other issues like, schools, how to students future-proof themselves, with their studies and so on. So I got started there, and that was so much fun that it didn't feel like work. While I was in that, or shortly after I left that role, actually, I met Julie Bishop sort of organically, and we had a conversation about politics. She was campaigning already. It was 2013, and there was a heavy, there was an election campaign underway. And so in the course of that conversation, I think we, seemed to have some views in common. She felt I could make a contribution. So down the track, I was invited to join her office. So I worked for Julie Bishop while she was foreign minister for about 2.5 years. And then I went in 2016, I went to the Prime Minister's office for, it was about 4 years in total. But in that time, there were two leaders, of course. So I lived through one leadership challenge and change. Really in government, of course, we also had the other leadership changes as well. So between three prime ministers, I served two of them, which was Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison. I admired them both a lot and learned a lot from them. And in some ways, what I was trying to do was get an apprenticeship in leadership from real leaders and from national leaders, and to try to piece together my own kind of approach to leadership based on the best examples that I could access. And I've since learned that that's a fairly common kind of approach. It's kind of mosaic or experiential kind of modelling of leadership. So wanting to have that apprenticeship, I worked pretty hard to get into those positions, and I guess I learned a lot. After 2019, which was the miracle election campaign, I felt I'd made a contribution that I was happy to make for the new Prime Minister at the time. He'd been in the role for about a year, and then of course won in that year. I came back to Perth for family reasons. We had a young, a few months old. We had our firstborn, and I sometimes tell the scene of being at Canberra Airport. I hadn't taken a day off in a very long time. But I was at Canberra Airport with my wife, my mother-in-law. We had the newborn, all these bags. I had taken the day off, but there'd been some, problem that resulted in people not being able to be available and so on. So it was down to me. And there I was trying to type a media release, with my mobile phone wedged against on the bonnet of the car. And I just thought, as much as I've loved this, it's probably not sustainable in this phase of life. So yeah, it's a shame, but had to take that moment and recognise it was time to come home to WA.
Lovely. From a politics point of view, in terms of the policy angles and in policy, what dimension and what direction do you see broadly your work, and what's the angle typically you go with, and what kind of policy angle you like, and then what kind of work do you like doing in that space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been as I said, to look at the leaders I've served. I've been a servant of the maybe the moderate and the centre of the Liberal Party. Throughout those years in politics. In some sense, that's like, that's pro free enterprise. That is essentially enabling people, if we're getting quite broad, it's enabling people to have the maximum amount of freedom over their own lives, maximum amount to keep the maximum amount of their own money, for instance, as my view has always been that people are going to spend their own money much better than the government can spend it. That's quite Friedman, I know. So I guess you might say that's a thread through my career as well. I read Friedman much later. I read it once I started working with economists after I entered.
Because they were quoting you, Friedman.
Well, no, the funny thing was actually a lot of them were talking to me about pump priming kind of Keynes kind of economics, and I found it. Around about that time, I started reading, trying to get my knowledge up so I could have the conversations credibly with those economists, and realised that what I was kind of modelling was this, quite influenced by Friedman, maybe West German kind of model, without knowing what that was. So it was nice to discover that and to realise that was a coherent kind of
thread
idea behind my thinking.
Wow. From broader policy perspective and specifically on economic reforms, and as you might appreciate that large economic reforms should happen on a consistent basis, and it takes a good amount of time, a decade or so, for the economic reforms to seep through to the front line to average Australian citizens so that they can see the benefits of economic reforms. Could you, from an historical context point of view, could you talk a few economic reforms in the Australian political history or Australian history?
Yeah.
And then we can just talk a bit more on that.
Sure. Well, you started having, economically, I give credit to the Hawke-Keating government. I have a theory about leadership, that it is having a vision. Having a vision is in some ways inherently ethical, because you're convincing people that this is the right thing to do to solve the problems that we all agree that we have, and that it's something that we should be doing over and above what we might otherwise do. So I think it relies a lot on leaders. That's the first thing to say about big reforms. It doesn't happen naturally. And some people say that Australia is really good at dealing with adversity and not terribly good at dealing with good times. But starting with Hawke and Keating, they floated the dollar. And I give great credit to Hawke and Keating for doing that. And they reformed competition rules, and they injected a greater degree of dynamism into the economy. It's quite a brave thing to do as a Labor Party, because that is the political wing of the union movement. So part of that kind of transformational effort was Hawke's own political capital in bringing the unions to the view that the whole economy is better off, and all the workers are better off if we have a more competitive economy. It was very protected. Heavy tariffs at the time. We were sort of dictating the price of things and so on. So all of those things just contributed to a kind of a lackluster economy. And Keating said at the time, we're at risk of becoming a banana republic. Which, historically, you look around the world, there have been countries that have been in a pretty similar position to Australia, especially like thinking about a resource reliance and so on, maybe an agricultural reliance, that have fallen apart because they have not pursued a model that is about, private property rights, low taxes, enabling competition, and so on. So, from that, again, one of the great Liberal Party Prime Ministers, John Howard, introduced the GST, which is a competition-based tax. It's much more efficient than the taxes that were taken out of the system. It taxes something, or it's when I say efficiency, what I mean is it taxes not activity, but it taxes essentially just things that are always going to be there. You don't want to tax things that you want to see more of. Malcolm Turnbull always used to say, if you want to see less of something, regulate it and tax it. And so this is why I sort of give credit to the leaders who have done the opposite. They have incentivized what we want to see, which is activity, competition, dynamism, entrepreneurialism, innovation. So from Hawke to Howard, you see the GST reform. You also John Key did the same thing in New Zealand. It helped get rid of a lot of inefficient taxes that were holding the economy back, slowing everything down, making it harder to run a business, and to still keep the revenue coming into the coffers, because government does things that are needed. There's no, even if you're a libertarian, you agree there are certain things that the government should do, and they need revenue to do it. But it's just a much more efficient way, and it doesn't drag down the economy to have taxes that are not, that are efficient in that way.
Two broad ideas in free markets and protectionism, and for some sectors, free markets work well, and specifically from an agrarian economy point of view. And that the communities in the regions are heavily dependent on agrarian economies, plus mining, which is more of a broader, but focusing on agrarian economy of Australia, how does protectionism / free markets play a role? And then what kind of economic mindset will support that industry?
Well, so maybe I can take a sort of a recent example. Going to a higher level, maybe to talk about just the concept of free trade. There can be a suspicion about it, because the idea is, there are people who can do things that we do overseas. They can do it more cheaply. For instance, if you've got a labour market that's different, your wages are lower and so on, that's the suspicion. But in reality, what we saw after, as I said, wall in Berlin comes down, all of these economies that were Soviet bloc economies, or that were command and control authoritarian governments, suddenly were no longer dictating the price of things, that they would step onto a free market increasingly. When that happens, it means that the consumer gets access to the best product at the best price, and that the competition between, it might be that there is a cheaper product out there, but you can equally, the theory says anyway, you can always provide a product that's high quality, maybe, or that has different characteristics. And as it turned out, Australia was quite good at competing on that level playing field once it was established. Once Australia stepped onto that field, we were pretty good at doing it. Our businesses tended to succeed. So, you can see from a revenue point of view, that's good for the government, because a business that says, well, I might have to change my business model a little bit, I might have to change my product, I might have to, maybe have an office overseas, or whatever it is. Businesses make these decisions about how they can make a best product or a best service, or create the best business and last, through change. All of that is sort of, it's just incentivized by a model that says the government doesn't dictate, what the price of that is. From 91 through to recent years, Australia has had a unbroken record of economic success. Our businesses have succeeded, and so on. The one caveat, and that I would say this, the one caveat to all of that is that Australia is pretty consistent about which businesses have succeeded. Australia's had a long period in which the same sort of 20 businesses have changed in and out of being our biggest business. And I do observe that maybe a step in even further into the free market kind of system would be what the US has in various ways. But their businesses rotate round a lot. So you will not have the same top 5 businesses for more than 10 years in the US.
In a typical economic cycle, you have a growth phase, a recession, and a depression, and that's a natural cycle. And then, and as you said, we had a long form economic success, and because government has intervened at different spots and different times to make that natural cycle, bit of unnatural to be intervening at different spots and different times. But how long and how far? Because the government intervention is the cost of the taxpayer. So it's a function of how much you can use the taxpayers' money to push money into the markets and then manage inflation and all of those things. So how do you see the government intervention supporting the long-term viability and sustainability of an economy?
Well, this is a question of what is the role for the left, right?
Yeah.
And I think, look, it's changed a little bit, globally. What does centre right and centre left parties believe? But broadly speaking, a pro-enterprise, and I should say pro-enterprise, it doesn't mean that you're pro-individual businesses.
Yeah.
It simply means that you want the conditions to be right. It's what I said about what my old man found when he came to Australia. You want the conditions to be right for any business
To prosper.
That's right. If it is done
The right way.
Yeah, if it's done within the rules, if the rules don't impede the creation of businesses, if it's not so complicated that a person with a good idea can't succeed, and so on. The role for the left has historically been, and this is a legitimate role, it's a legitimate need for the left in this sense, is that they have moderated, the extreme end of that. So, in the 70s, there was a big debate about safety in cars, in the United States, and whether or not a business should be responsible for bearing the cost of putting in seatbelts or putting in airbags or, putting in, I think there was a case with Ford, for instance, about having, having the car be structural enough that it could withstand being, rear-ended, things like that.
Yeah.
So that is a really legitimate and important role. And when you talk about government intervention, there are reasons to have regulatory rigour, and that's legitimate for a government to do. So I may be a small government person, but I recognise, of course, that role. So in terms of intervention, where you go too far is, perhaps I might say a good example is, again, I'll talk about the US.
That's fine.
Rent control in the United States in certain places. A rent control sounds like a good idea. If you've got a property market that's too hot, that a person, you take a person who's on a low income, maybe they've had disadvantages in life. They say, I can't get into this property market in New York City. I can't afford an apartment. So it sounds politically appealing to have a rent control, to say, either government are going to dictate to you what you can charge in rent on that place. The reason it's a bad idea, and the reason that it causes the opposite of what it should, which is often the case in these economic cases, they're often backwards, is that put yourself in the position of a person who's building houses. You're not going to build a house that's in that band. You're going to build a luxury apartment, because you can then decide what you charge for it. You're not going to build a house that's suitable, for a
Small family.
compact or a small family. You're not going to do that. The other thing is it's a disincentive for people to find the house that they should be in the sense, so you'll have maybe an elderly widow living in an unsuitably large place. You'll have a family crammed into an unsuitably small place. You want those people you want the stock to cycle through, but that rent control sits in the way and says, nope, that your single person is going to stay in your unsuitably large place. I might say it's a little bit like stamp duty. So I did a little work in my past life at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We did some work on stamp duty. It's a similar thing. It prevents, for example, a landlord from refurbishing the place and making it suitable, because the landlord knows that they can't get a more advantageous rent, so they just let the asset sit fallow. And so what you saw in the United States when that was tried, there were neighbourhoods in New York which, literally they rotted and fell into disrepair because, there was no positive cycling through of people using that stock and refurbishing and replenishing the stock that was there.
Wow. I think that's a good segue onto the housing challenge the country is facing, the affordability of housing and the demand and the supply on all sides, and foreign investment into housing as a country as a whole. So first of all, if you can define the problem and then what are the probable solutions and what are the challenges we might face and then how long-term the solution should be.
Yeah. Well, I should say I'm not an expert on housing. These are just sort of the general principles that I was talking about. And you can see, and no denying there is, there's an appeal out there at the moment to try to get rent caps in place in Australia. And I think what I've outlined would demonstrate why it's a bad idea. The other thing is, by the way, just to finish that last thought, it snaps back into place when you remove the caps. Not only is no one better off, the price just snaps back up to the natural point of the market once those rent controls are removed down the track. In terms of Australia's housing situation, I think most policy at the moment is focused on the supply side. Again, as I said, I'm no expert in this field, but I would suggest that we're right to think that there are land use regulations, there are planning and other sort of red tape kind of aspects, which are the responsibility of state, federal, and local governments, all of which stand in the way of houses being built responsibly at a decent pace and so on. And I used to have clients who were builders who would simply say that, in the current circumstance, they would do a quote for a house. They would need to make enough profit on the other house that they were building to come back and pay for everything that they were doing on the second house. And when inflation runs fast, it is a tax essentially, that prevents the second house from actually being finished because the first one can't recoup its costs. So it's a complication for the business of building houses, which is a major problem because, as I see it, and I think a lot of the evidence seems to indicate that it is a supply kind of challenge. We're just not building enough houses.
And could you talk on the work you did on stamp duty and broader overviews on stamp duty? What's the correlation between having a stamp duty impacting new houses being built and creating more supply and vis-a-vis? And what's the sweet spot where it becomes more approachable to create new housing opportunities in the marketplace?
Yeah. Well, the work that I was doing was always sort of trying to suggest that so in the case of stamp duty, the work that we supported at the Chamber of Commerce was to say that stamp duty should be replaced. That was different to work that was on, so for instance, with payroll tax, which is the tax on jobs in WA, we were suggesting it should be lower as opposed to removed. Like I say, governments need sources of revenue to do important things that should be done. But in the case of stamp duty, we were sort of suggesting that there were different ways to replace it. The political challenge was that it would have had to have been replaced under one of our suggestions with something like a land tax. The idea being that for the consumer, you're paying a small fee continuously rather than one large sum that stops you, that is sort of a stumbling block to doing the sort of behaviour that I was mentioning. You want, the widower to move into a small place. You want the family to move into a big place. You want, for instance, young people or people with low incomes to be able to move to where more suitable jobs are. This is the barrier as a stamp duty. It sits in the way of those people being able to do that. And actually, the study that we did was indicating that it's particularly unfair to those people because it impacts them more. A person on low income and a young person is likely to have to move much more often than a person who's set up from the beginning with living in a suitable suburb in a suitable place and so on. They don't have to pay stamp duty. But if you have to move to keep up to sort of move up into the middle class, for instance, we want you to be able to do that. We want there to be upward mobility in the economy, but stamp duty sits in the way. It's and talk to anyone. Talk to anyone of my generation. Talk to the Zs and the and the Alphas. They're already starting to say, this is say you're a first home buyer and you're like, okay, I'm just in the market, and now what I want to do is take the next step. I want to get the right job. Maybe I have to move city. You have to give the government a huge sum of money for what? For the privilege of walking out your own door, handing over something that belongs to you. So you can see the problem that it creates for young people.
Yeah, and your broader work and understanding on the skills, as things are changing and evolving, how do you think in terms of the education sector, whether it's tertiary and vet sector, geared up as the economy changes, as the focus moves away from, for example, traditional jobs to new kind of work, and then to add to the idea of to have more nuclear engineers being produced in Australia. We don't have many faculties, many R&D within universities to train young people to be nuclear engineers. So how do we? So that's one example, but there are many other examples of pivoting to the new skill sets.
Broadly speaking, as I saw it in the kind of the work that I did, and maybe I can really talk from a WA perspective, but essentially everything that we want to encourage, we're sort of still running behind on. You know, there was this sort of your heavy diesel mechanics, your sparkies, your auto mechanics, your whatever. You take your trade skill. There was a significant, you could see coming down the pipeline. We wanted a lot more. And I know that a lot of governments are out there incentivizing people. It might be free to study certain skills, and that's good. You know, you take the example of the nuclear subs. You know, in the United States, if you want to captain a nuclear sub, you have to have a nuclear PhD. And there were, I think, when AUKUS was conceived, 0 nuclear PhDs in Australia. So it demonstrates the point that you're making. However, Australians are on board US ships and on UK ships, as I understand it. There's sort of a steady cycle of people who are identified as going through, you know, training over there. You know, so the big sub manufacturing base in Barrow Island in the UK, I understand, is pretty regularly having Australians through the door, officials and people learning the skills and so on. But essentially, you're right. This is one of the ongoing challenges for Australia. We are a small population. We have a huge kind of economic horizon because we're in the Indo-Pacific where there's $2 trillion of market churning around us. We're this maritime nation, for instance, which is not highly effective at the maritime trade. Notwithstanding that we do so much activity, we don't run it, and a lot of the mariners, for instance, don't come from home. So look, that is a challenge, and essentially what people can take from it, what I took from it, and when I talk to young people, I just say the amazing thing about Australia is what's ahead of us, right? We've got such an opportunity to grow, and the world is kind of your oyster in some sense. If you're gonna be, as I said, in that sort of STEM area, and the young people, coming up behind, they are conversant in technology. Each new generation comes along, they are so much more comfortable with it. There's a price to pay for that, but in terms of their kind of economic opportunity, it's pretty good. If you want to go into a field where you have reasonable career stability, and you might not have one career, say, but you want to be employable throughout your life, Australia, with its kind of skill shortages in a lot of places, it's a good place to be as a candidate.
From one of this angle of being a sovereign nation, and one is to be energy independent, that you're not importing energy in some way or form, and that you should be able to produce enough and all forms of energy in whichever format you want to consume. Could you, with a broad brush, could you talk about why energy independence is so important, and then what are the critical factors you need to consider around that?
Yep, I can talk in maybe, again, sort of broad historical terms. So Foreign Policy recently put out a pretty influential article called "Why is Everything National Security Now?" And it was sort of related to the fact that, in the current environment, lots of governments around the world are doing industry policy, and they do it because they say it's relevant to national security. So this is related to the idea that, we should be able to manufacture everything that we need at home. After COVID, it became clear that supply chains were more vulnerable than we realised. That there were a lot of things that we needed to be able to do at home. That was the judgment of government, rather than doing it at the cheapest possible price, doing this very kind of fractured approach. So energy is the first thing that became national security in the 70s, I might say. I'm generalising and sort of, but because of the OPEC crisis, which was oil-producing nations essentially through their behaviour driving up the price of oil, there was a sort of a realization, again, it was a similar sort of circumstance, which said, well, in order to run the economy, in order to have our ships fueled up, in order to, keep national security safe, in order to, essentially do anything, there needed to be a steady access of energy. And I say, so the decision at that time was essentially to find to diversify your sources of energy. So for that reason, we continue to have this concept of energy security. It can come in the form of, since the 70s, it's been in large part about oil and liquid fuel. But, in the modern context, energy security means when we, hit the switch, does the light turn on?
Mm-hmm.
Do our hospitals, have power running? Do our defence facilities and so on? So it can be electricity as well. And in the context of the electricity grid, it might mean managing this particular challenge of renewables, which is that in the old, under what they call a baseload system, you would have most of your energy coming from large single installations, which is, in Australia's case, coal. Mm-hmm. And you'd spin turbines at a particular rate, and that rate was like the heartbeat through the energy system, mm-hmm. which everything that added into that system had to match that heartbeat. Mm-hmm. So nowadays we have the commitment to do this pivot to renewables. So we're looking at an 82% renewable target for our economy. The difference with renewables is that it doesn't spin turbines. It's a current straight into the system. Mm-hmm. And it fluctuates. Sun's high or the wind's blowing really hard, you have additional supply. So energy security also means managing that challenge. So mm-hmm. in the case of Australia currently, that is it's going to rely a lot on gas. It's going to be gas peakers, mm-hmm. which can be cycled up or down to manage that fluctuation. So the other part of it is batteries. Mm-hmm. So battery storage is really interesting to Australia because we have a lot of the critical minerals that are needed for those batteries, especially if we could do more of the chemical processing, the upstream stuff. I was just talking to experts from Japan who were saying that they would love if Australia were able to provide some diversity of, for their energy security, some diversity of processing for these critical minerals. Because, so in the case of Japan, we're back a little bit on the geopolitics, Japan was subject to a sort of punitive action from China, in the past, which said, we don't, essentially that there was an objection to some foreign policy positions, and that was acted on in an economic way that withheld resources from Japan that they needed. I think, Australia has experienced that to some extent. There's been a pulling back of trade, which is seen by some to be punitive. Mm-hmm. But essentially what Japan was saying was, this is the idea of friendshoring. It's the idea that, well, if we could rely on the Australians to process a lot of the critical minerals, that would mean we're less reliant on a single economy for all of our needs. Mm-hmm. It would also be great for Australia, as we've talked about.
Yes.
If we could live up to the opportunity, if we had the skills, if we had a lot of people who, chemical engineers, and if we have the young people coming through and choosing STEM careers and doing that, then we could rise to that challenge. At the moment, it's partially an economic problem that you have to make it profitable, and it's also with the batteries. It's also kind of, as I understand it, a sort of a race of chemistry, because at the moment they're up to about 4 hours that you can rely on them for on a large scale. But the Chamber of Minerals and Energy and so on are interested in this. They sort of say that as that race continues, no one quite knows what the form of battery is going to be. It's probably going to be lithium ion, based on what Rio Tinto said recently. They're looking at lithium in a big way.
I would love to know your views, because every few years the term leadership evolves and morphs into new terms. People start having different labels, different style of leadership, and then in politicians you have different style of leaders versus in corporates and versus bureaucrats and all the different styles. But the crux of it is very similar in terms of good leaders. So for yourself, how do you define good leaders, and how do you define what they mean to you, and then how has the role of leaders in your life played to understand those things?
Well, look, great question. As I said, I tried to get a apprenticeship in leadership, the most direct way I could. I've studied leadership a little, and the Harvard Kennedy School has a sort of a leadership model which says that it is, if I see if I can get it right, it is the taking responsibility for enabling others to act on their values in circumstances of uncertainty. That's the Harvard Kennedy version. As I said to you, I think my the other version that I like is from Kissinger. So Kissinger's book on leadership has the prophet and the statesman kind of model, and he goes through examples of why favorite examples of his fit that different mold, and it's what value most guides your leadership. And I think for example, he gives Lee Kuan Yew, who had the leadership value of excellence, and he had Konrad Adenauer, who had the leadership quality of humility. As I said, for myself, I have a sort of comparatively limited kind of leadership horizon, but the way I think about it is, like I said, it's to have a vision, to be able to articulate your vision, to be able to communicate with people about why that is the best way to act, and why they should act in that way rather than any other way, in their own self-interest. So all of that being equal, the other thing that I like to do is to have a sense of perspective, and I just found out today, actually, that at Yale University, if you do a MBA, they will get you as an exercise to write your own obituary. And this is great, because what I like to do with my team is to say, imagine yourself on your last day of your career. You've got white hair, if you're lucky. Your hands look like old gnarled tree roots. Everyone in the room is 30 years younger than you. What are you most proud of, right? What makes you think, yeah, that was a good career, that was worth it? It's and that you can think, I'll sail off into retirement. That was a good way to spend my life. So yeah, those are the models. I think I have my preferred one, which is maybe slightly more active. But because people in my family, some of them have not lived to a ripe old age, I take that sort of slightly morbid kind of line of thinking. What's going to, at the end of my life, what's going to have made it all worth it? And what would I be proud of?
I think one thing which with your background in history, as your dad came over, and then the idea was, give me the opportunity and I'll make the best of it. Probably that's kind of and you were given the opportunities, and you had the opportunities, and then you delivered your best, and then you've been doing the best. And I think, how do you see that kind of a leadership style, that providing opportunities is at the first stage, and then people will shine up and then rise up to the occasion?
Yep. Well, that is not to harp too much about the Harvard Kennedy School, but they have a framework of adaptive leadership on this. It's a similar sort of thing. It's the same thing that makes an economy work, it's the same thing that makes a team work. Are you giving people the opportunity to challenge ideas, to be innovative? Are you giving people a sense of, I don't like the term safety, to be honest. I feel like, we need to have a sort of a degree of courage. I think it's on each of us to have a degree of courage. But as a leader, if you're creating a space where you're not punishing people for coming at you for challenging your ideas. For instance, there's this idea that comes from, I think it's Apple, but the idea is that the leader shouldn't actually have an opinion until right at the end. Because then you're creating space for your team. You can go around the room, say, we've got a problem. How do you solve it? What do you think? And that they aren't going to be contradicting the boss to do it. And the way I see it is like, there are other models. There's the authoritarian model that says, I'm the leader, I know, But if you can create a sense of ownership for your team, for solving problems, they're much more likely to really give it a proper go, because they feel a sense of ownership towards it. They also sort of, they sort of take it on. personally, then if the idea succeeds, they are wrapped. If the idea fails, they think, how could we do it? I've let someone down, and it sort of means something to them. Whereas if you're dictating to people, you'll either get the idea that you asked for in appearance only, or in the bare minimum kind of version that you asked for, or what I said, appearance only. You'll get people complying, but maybe maliciously complying. Whereas so that's the adaptive leadership thing. You speak last, in the Simon Sinek kind of way. You eat last. Your team is everything. Your team's your family. Your team's your your child. I know that can become a caricature, but the examples through, I think, of the COVID pandemic contrast the businesses that responded to the COVID pandemic with layoffs compared to those who furloughed staff, who said, we have a sort of a compulsory period of leave, maybe. You can take it at a time you like, but you're not losing your job. That's why JobKeeper was actually a really clever way of responding to the COVID pandemic, because it maintained the connection of businesses with their staff. The business that suffers, that says, I'm no longer profitable because I'm not allowed to operate, I have to let all my staff go. The government saying, we'll maintain at a certain level the wages of your staff. It had its imperfections, but that was a clever way of approaching it, more so than others, how others approached it.
It's good to have good leaders. What about bad ones? And I think if you can explain that, when you have good leaders, it works very well, and everything falls into place, and the followership expands, and the followership will deliver on the vision and the purpose, and they have the right reasons to do it. But when you have bad leaders or leaders on the other side, what are the telltale signs in terms of the culture of the people who are following the leader, in terms of the work they're doing and the quality of outcomes?
Yeah, I've worked on teams which were following this model that says, we're going to get, it sounds counterintuitive, we're going to get the absolute best top of the tops. We're going to get, these people out of slick organizations, they're going to have the best CVs and so on. We put them in. And I've worked in those teams, and there was a bit of a Shark Tank to it. Everyone was sort of like, battling and sort of doing a lot of biting each other under the water in a battle for credit, whose idea gets across the line and so on. The team is a much more effective thing. And, there's a sort of a cliche that says, it's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So a team, if you're building a team, it's much more effective to think, how does this team work together, than to say, who is the best? And there's this idea that says, I'm on here how you create a good team. So I'm not quite answering the question. But the idea is, you hire lots of people at once. You hire groups of people at once, because then they may match each other nicely. They may complement each other. It's a bit like if you're buying two cars, you don't buy the same car twice. I forget where I read this theory, but I really like it. In terms of a bad leader, everyone's had a bad leader, right? In fact, I'll tell you just a little story.
I only had good leaders in my life.
Oh, that's good. That's really lucky.
And oxymoron.
Right. Well, okay. Just this short story. When I was a kid, I think this played into how I've turned out, I'll be honest. When I was a kid, I came back from a holiday. I came back into primary school. And unbeknownst to me, the school had taken the decision to ban all name calling. Any name calling was going to be, you're suspended. So, of course, what's the first thing that happens? I'm a little, punk school kid. In I come. Somebody gives me a hard time. The first thing I do is say, you're a goose, or you dummy, or something like that. And I could see, like, this kid transformed. He was so excited because he was going to be able to get me in so much trouble, and I was completely unknowing, and it was put before the principal. And I just remember thinking, even then, the injustice of this, the fact that this is such an overreach of these well-meaning people who are so sure of their intentions, so sure of the purity of their kind of approach, that they thought, perfect, I can make an example out of this kid, And I was sort of put on display almost in the hallway, because no one else didn't know about this rule. So I was this sort of tear-streaked kid. Feeling sorry for myself. Who hasn't felt that experience of being made to feel, sort of,
Example.
made an example of, put under a spotlight, so self-conscious. And what I sort of learned from that was, wow, my principal who is doing this is clearly not up to the task, right? That is a person who is unsuitable for leadership. And I made a kind of decision at that point. I'm actually going to not put up with like minor league tyrants in life. And the experience that I've had, so we're talking about bad leaders, people who should have nothing to do with leadership, winding up in positions of authority. I've never seen them get to the top. I'm not making any insinuation about anyone. I've never seen such a person get to the top. I've seen people who are completely unsuitable to leadership get close to the top. And that's by, like I say, having no humility, having a total confidence in their own viewpoint, not wanting to listen, wanting to punish people who question their authority, and who just knew best. There's a sort of command and control kind of approach. There are so many things that you can do wrong as a leader, that's for sure.
Before I think another one I have in my head to ask you is in terms of what kind of philosophy do you adhere to? Do you have any philosophers do you read and understand and do you like?
Philosophers, I read Plato's Republic when I was probably mid-20s. Plato's Republic is excellent. It has its a kind of maybe a cliched answer. I'm trying to think of other. Adam Smith. I think we're all in search of our own values, right? When we're coming through life and we realize that this is what we're doing, we're trying to figure out what really makes my heart sing. Right? For me, it's simplicity and clarity. It is humility, kind of. I haven't quite nailed it, but it is something like willingness to learn and willingness to hear other people with goodwill. Because as I said, when you meet people who don't have that, they are so sure. And there's that old idea from Reagan, right, that says the most terrifying thing you could hear is like, I'm here to help, and I'm going to do for you what's good for you, whether you like it or not. That I'm not sure how to articulate that in one word, but there's something to that for me.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Talking about your father and your family, the way you were fathered, and then now you are a father, and then the way you are fathering, can you portray the dichotomy of two, the way you have observed a role model in your life and the way you are trying to pass on that?
Well, as it sort of might have come through a little bit when I was a kid, my dad was my hero, absolutely. And actually one thing that's stuck with me is I remember being with him at like an event. His English was okay, of course, by that point, if I can remember it, some years had passed. But I remember being there in this sort of sea of suit pant legs. I couldn't see, it was just a forest of suit material. But I was holding my dad's hand and he was telling someone what he did for a living. And he runs a small business, And I remember this guy's face completely changed, and he sort of had taken in the accent, he'd taken in the job title. He didn't even bother finishing the conversation, and he just turned away and just said, didn't say anything, just was like, right, I don't need to talk to you type thing. And I felt quite affected by that, because even by that point I'd absorbed Australians are quite egalitarian usually. So I really didn't like that kind of elitist thing. But what the model of fatherhood that Dad was doing, which I felt in that moment was just being completely disrespected, was the simple dignity of holding down a job and supplying, a living to your family, giving your kids opportunities that you didn't have. It is Australian dream stuff. My old man's quite stoic. He's a tough, character. And the other thing I may have mentioned to you already, the going around Germany with him as a kid and seeing how passionate he was and how emotional he became. You never saw the guy be emotional, but seeing how hell had been transformed into heaven, in his words. East Germany, a complete failed kind of experiment to be brought back to life essentially in the course of our being there. Those are things that stick out with me. But his, in terms of modelling fatherhood, what I took from him was having faith in or encouraging out the best in you. You know, I mentioned this idea that I felt a sense of responsibility to rise to be worthy of the opportunity I was given. That comes from Dad, and it's not to disparage other models of this, but he didn't really. He always had a sense of, well, you could be more than you are. You got to live up to your potential, and I think that maybe is an important part of fatherhood that is not necessarily valued that strongly, because there's an idea nowadays that it's like, well, as a parent, your responsibility is nurture the kid's self-esteem. That's fine as far as it goes. You know, it's important. You don't want the kid to doubt themselves and so on. But the idea that it's this specific idea of you'll find the way you are. And as a kid, I could see other kids, you know, who had been parented that way, and they sort of quite directionless. Whereas I was always looking for, what's my path? What are my strengths? What could I be? You know, and that was what Dad encouraged. He was always like, you know, kid, get your act together. You know, rise to the occasion here. And in some sense, it was harsh, but it was also liberating and inspiring, because I thought, it's like the deputy principal who said to me, "You'll go and do law, won't you?"
Yeah.
That wasn't much encouragement, but it was like,
just that hint.
It was just a, you know, you could be that, you know. And, you know, yeah, the old bloke was the same.
Yeah. Could you talk more on your understanding on parenting broadly? And, you know, yes, as a parent, you are nurturing and safeguarding your young ones. But one form of parenting is you have to bring some discipline and structure so that the kids learn the nature of play and then making mistakes. So part of learning and part of the play is you make mistakes, you will fall, you'll get up and you do things. And how far, and on one school of thought is you keep them safe and cotton balling around the child, and how far doing parenting from that format becomes, in a way, abusive longer term, because you're not prepping the child or young person for a broader life.
I love this question, because, you know, what is good play, right? This is kind of like the question of what is it to be a good sport. That's what, as a dad, you want to impart. It's quite hard to articulate. It doesn't mean necessarily winning all the time. It means being socialized enough, it means adhering to rules. It means kind of, you know, voluntarily agreeing on what the domain of the game will be. It's really such an interesting idea, because it's like, I'm trying to remember where I read it, but the idea is that play is like a preparation for the world. And so as a kid, or rather as a parent, you want your kid to be able to be social enough to play in a way that they'll be continuously invited to keep playing. You want them to succeed within the game, but it doesn't matter that much to you whether they win a game of irrelevant, you know, like when they're small, that's not the point. It's about the socialization. And you know, you talk about cotton balling. What happens to young kids who are too cotton balled, who come into a society of kids? You know, it's quite bruising for them, because they have to have their behaviour sort of knocked into something resembling the right but the kind of behaviour. You know, it's compliance to some extent, but it's also socialisation. So the kids, I mean, I see it. My little ones, you know, they go out and you see little bits of their idiosyncrasies knocked off by a kid who's a bit too tough with them, or, you know, they might cry over something. You think, you know, blimey. But is your role to intervene? That's the question. And what you really want is them to be up to the task of socialising, of playing in a productive way, and then going out into the world, right? Because, as I said, if play is a proxy for the world, you need the kid as early as possible, really, to be up to the task. I mean, within the bounds of like, you know, what's suitable for a 3-year-old and so on.
You're right.
Yeah. So it can be hard. I think we've got this kind of modern thing of gentle parenting, right? I don't know much about it, but what I see of it is that, you know, you maybe put up with things that you shouldn't put up with.
Yeah.
Because then that's the kid being themselves. Well, everyone, maybe you have a different experience, but I think there are kids at school that I can remember who were too idiosyncratic to get on with the society of the school. And I wonder how they would have gone out in the world, because what you want at school, apart from learning things, is to make friends, to find a place where you belong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can't do that, if you're too indulged, you know, it can be hard on the kid. So who are you doing the favor to, right? If your kid, if you're so accepting of your kid as they are, and as opposed to thinking what could they be like, so what are you doing them a favor?
You're right. Yeah. And then hyper individualization, that, you know, so the child becomes the center of decision making, but whereas that's the responsibility of a parent. So the parent child relationship and the decision making, and then that has to be there's nuance in there, in what age group, and then when the parents will step back and say, you know, make your mistakes and I will come when you need me, and then there is, you know, for me to intervene.
I mean, the worst thing as a kid, if you've ever been in this situation where you're kind of in a confrontation and you're sort of posturing maybe with some other kids, or, you know, you're sort of thinking, I have to stand up, like this idea of me standing up for myself, you know, I'm making too much of it. But I've been in that boat where I was like, these kids are testing my boundaries here.
Yeah.
And I just remember the worst thing that could have happened would have been for mum to come up and say, boys don't fight. You know, would have been disastrous. I would have lost, you know, all standing. So you want to, that's what I'm getting at. I am speaking for the principle of letting a kid experience what they need to, because they'll experience it one way or another in the world. And either it'll be for the first time and they will have no idea how to react, and they will not be resilient to it because it'll be a shock. Or you can, you can have a suitably tempered kind of exposure to the world being harsh.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. So glad. Thanks a lot.
It's been a really enjoyable conversation, Deb.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, good on you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.